Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Today's video features truly terrifying ghost and paranormal stories. If you like things that go bump in the night, you're sure to enjoy this one. Please leave a like on the video as it helps this video perform at a much higher rate. If you would like to have your story featured on an upcoming video, email it to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. I will leave a link to my email in the description box below at the end of the video. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. A couple of months ago, my friend's cousin, a single mother, bought a new cell phone. After a long day of work, she came home, placed her phone on the counter, and went to watch TV. Her son came out to ask her if he could play with her new phone. She told him not to call anyone or mess with text messages, and he agreed. At around 11:20, she was drowsy, so she decided to tuck her son in and go to bed. She walked to his room and saw that he wasn't there. She then ran over to her room to find him sleeping on her bed with the phone in his hand. Relieved, she picked her phone back up from his hand to inspect it. Browsing through it, she noticed only minor changes such as a new background and banner, but then she opened up her saved pictures. She began deleting the pictures he had taken until only one new picture remained. When she first saw it, she was in disbelief. It was her son sleeping on her bed, but the picture was taken by someone else above him, and it showed the left half of an elderly woman's face. My house was built in 1904. It is a single-family home, wood frame setting on a concrete block foundation. I've been living here for about 12 years. Of all the weird things that my siblings and me have seen or heard in this house, this one event is my favorite. This happened to my brother. About 10 years ago, my brother and his best friends had started a garage band, playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. They would practice into the early evening, and they would usually call it quits around 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and went to bed, because I worked the graveyard shift. This happened in late fall, so the days were getting shorter. They had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddy so they could load up the equipment. Everyone had filed out of the basement, but the tricky part was that they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the stairs, through the kitchen doorway, down the hall into the living room, and out onto the front porch. Everyone was outside sitting in my brother's truck waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left his pancakes in a to-go container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He made the decision to go back. Now the basement is not clean, with full sight lines. There had been partitions made, and the boiler and main heating unit are right smack in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he is about to retrieve his food container, when out of the corner of his eye he sees it. There's a shadowy figure right at his peripheral vision. This feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. We had been taught that if you were in the presence of a spirit or ghost, and you felt a bad vibe, to say a quick prayer or to cuss at it. My brother chose the latter. He basically just said, "Screw you. I don't have time for this shit." My brother started to walk to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing doors and turning off lights as he walked out. The last light switch is on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily, the door was open and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt something at his back, but at no point did he turn around. As he flicked the last light switch, the living room went dark, as did the rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him, still holding his food container in one hand He jogged down the few porch steps. He walked towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard, but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friend-laden truck, he kind of smiled and thought things over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason. He climbed into the driver's side of his truck, put on his seatbelt and got ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house, when one of his friends asked, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" My brother said, "What do you mean?" "He went to work earlier tonight. He's already gone. Did you see his car anywhere?" The next question they asked, "So then who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house?" My older sister has a ghost that followed her around for many years. I lived with her once for about 3 months. So much weird stuff happened in that time. All my sister would say to me when I mentioned it was that her ghost didn't like me being there. Things like going to bed with everything locked up and switched off, and waking up in the morning with the back door open, lights on and the kettle switched on. One night my sister and I were getting ready to go out, and I'd asked to borrow her liquid foundation. I used it and put it back where she kept her makeup. 10 minutes later she's asking me for it, and it was nowhere to be seen. She accused me of taking it and made me buy her a new one, refused to listen to my side of the story. About a year or so later, when she was packing to move to a new house, she found the makeup in a shoebox with some old letters. The shoebox was in a zipped-up suitcase that was underneath their bed, but probably the most scared I've ever felt one afternoon was when I was the only one in the house, which never happened as 4 of us lived there. I had arrived home from work and headed straight to the bathroom. All the bathroom doors were closed and locked. I was standing in the bathroom and started squeezing a pimple on my chin when a female voice in the hall said, "Stop picking your zits." It was loud enough and sounded real enough, and at the time I thought it was my sister. I stuck my head out into the hall. No one was there. I searched the house top to bottom, and there was no one home. I sat out on the front porch until someone else got home because I didn't want to be there alone. Something strange happened to ex-con Babe and their grandma. One night, they stayed up late watching The Walking Dead. Their grandma had never seen the show before, so she'd spent the past few nights binging late into the night. It was about 4 a.m. when the two turned off the television and the lights and called it a night. Their grandmother went into her room, and our Reddit user went to the bathroom to brush their teeth. That was when they heard 3 light knocks right behind them. Since the bathroom was connected to their grandma's room, they assumed it was her checking to see if they were in the bathroom. They answered but didn't get a response. When they left the bathroom and met their grandma in the hallway, she asked what the user wanted. Confused, the writers said that they thought she was the one knocking on the bathroom door, but Grandma had also heard 3 knocks on her door and thought it was a Reddit user. A few years ago, Reddit user Tom had just been through a rough divorce from their high school sweetheart. Their best friend had taken to distracting them by taking long road trips. One morning, they were on their way to Carlsbad, New Mexico, when they paused alongside a river dam. They were drinking cider and snacking when the pair decided to explore the dried riverbed. It was obvious that they weren't the first ones to go trekking through the riverbed. The pair could see human, canine, and feline footprints in the mud. They then recalled starting to feel an odd sensation, like they were being watched. Their friend caught the writer's attention and called them over. There was a bone in the ground, what they now believe was a spinal cord. At first they thought it was beef or pork bone of some kind. They continued looking around the riverbed when they found a strange rust-colored rock sticking out from the sand. When they got closer, they realized it was a half-buried little girl's shoe. The Reddit user stepped back and ran forward, preparing to kick the shoe. Suddenly, they heard a little girl's voice shout, "No, don't, please." They looked around but didn't see anyone besides themselves and their friend. The friend asked why they stopped, and they replied, "Didn't you hear that little girl?" Both confused, they decided to shrug it off and continued on their way. Meanwhile, the feeling that someone was watching them grew stronger. A few minutes later, they spotted another bone. Now they began to get scared. The bone was clearly human. The friend called the non-emergency police number for Carlsbad, and they reported what they saw. 1 week later, they received a call from their friend that the Carlsbad police had called to report the bones they found were indeed human. During the investigation, the two were questioned and eventually informed that the rust-colored rock actually wasn't a rock at all, but the shell of a pickup truck that had disappeared along with the family of 3. It had been carrying a man, a woman, and their daughter. It made the Reddit user think back to the girl's shoes sticking out of the mud and the voice they heard. Could the little girl have spoken directly to them? Last year, Small Bean Dean went to a friend's house for a party. Around 1 a.m, the group decided to use a Ouija board. The Reddit user was the only one who believed in accounts of the paranormal, so she was hesitant when her friends brought out the Ouija board. But instead of giving her friends more reasons to tease her, she acted as if she didn't believe in such an activity. They began using the board questions. They started with a few normal questions and nothing really exciting happened. Then someone asked if the spirit wanted to hurt them, and it responded with, "Only one." The group started to get creeped out at this point, and rightfully so. When one friend asked the natural follow-up question, "Who?" the board spelled out Natasha, the Reddit user's full name. It should be noted that she doesn't care for their full name, and as everyone else called her Tasha instead. Tasha then left the room while her friends continued playing, but found out later that night that the group forgot to say goodbye to the board. Anyone familiar with Ouija knows that closing the interaction with the spirit is crucial before stopping use of the board. Needless to say, she was nervous. After this, Tasha has no memory of the night. She only remembers getting a migraine and nosebleeds. Her friends took videos of her acting strangely, speaking with a changed voice, and a few instances of her talking in other languages. However, that night wasn't the only time this happened. In the days following, Tasha's parents reported the same things happening. Once again, she remembered nothing but migraines and nosebleeds. About 2 weeks later, she was back to normal, or so she thought. Tasha was suddenly hospitalized for an excruciating pain in her kidney, so bad that it almost shut down her organ. The doctors tried everything but couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then, on the day she was scheduled for surgery, the pain suddenly stopped. 1 day later, Tasha was released. Since that incident, she has never felt like she was truly alone. Sometimes she feels someone grabbing her hands or neck, making it difficult to breathe. Tasha has always believed in the paranormal, but this experience made it far more real for her. My grandfather told me this story about how one time he was sitting in a chair in the front of his house when he heard his wife repeatedly calling from inside the house. The thing is, my grandmother passed away a few years before that, but he told me that the voice was so pressing that he actually got up to look inside the house. And as soon as he got inside the house, he heard a loud crash behind him, and turned around to see that the chair he'd been sitting in moments ago had been crushed by the cast iron gutter that fell on it. If he hadn't come inside the house, he would have probably been seriously injured. I don't know if it's paranormal or not, but every time I think about it, it sends chills down my spine. When I was younger, I had an imaginary friend who lived in this massive antique dresser. I vividly remember him telling me stories, although I have absolutely no recollection of what they actually were. I remember one day talking to my parents about it. Dad traveled quite a bit, so he wasn't up to date with what I was into, and when I started telling him about my dresser buddy, he wanted to know his name. It was something innocent like Peter, but I can still see him going white in the face as I told him. I then drew a picture of Peter for him. The very next day, my dad and my uncle took the dresser and burned it. It wasn't until a few years later when I found out my dad's lower brother, my uncle, also had the same friend with the same name who lived in the same antique dresser. After a few months of the typical imaginary friend stuff, my uncle started having night terrors and couldn't sleep because of Peter. It got so bad they had to move him out of his room before he managed to get back to normal. A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 3 a.m. every night. He would answer and it was a hellish sounding noise, like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this and it stopped. Then after a week or so it began again, the exact same noise, exact same time. Finally one day he decided to back dial the call. It was an old man that had no clue what he was talking about. Still, the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, it would call a few more times. No messages were ever left. He decided to say screw it, ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got another new number. You guessed it, the screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time he was terrified every night. Unsure why this was happening, he back-dialed the number again and got a different person. Around this time he lost his job and his phone. The calls stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. One day my mom asked me to listen to this weird message she got at our home phone. It was the static screaming. We showed my brother and he was freaking out. He back-dialed the number again, and it said the number was disconnected this time. Never heard from it again after that. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. If you want your story featured on an upcoming video, send it now. My email is in the description box below. Until we meet again, have a great week. Stay sinful.